So John, we're getting closer to the finish line on this project. It's taken a wee while, but it's looking pretty smart now. How close are we to the finish?
Not far away actually, Chris. We've just got the roof to be finished here. There's been a few hold-ups with COVID and manpower and what have you, and deliveries. So hopefully that gets done this week. We've got an engineer who's building some public steps for us, which will be steel tread plate with handrails for access for different ages and physical abilities. And then just to finish the carriage for myself, I've got the original steps that we're going to put on the outside. We won't require them on the inside. So I'm going to put the original steps that we found under the trees when we picked this up in September 2020 from Waireo. We're going to put those steps on there, but they'll be non-functional, just for looks and to get it back as original as possible. And the inside, we've only got the display panels that Rob Scott at Camvart is making to go between the windows. They're just going to be a basic panel with information, as this is all part of the V recovery project. This is the information centre for that project, and we'll also offer other information around the Lumsden Heritage Trust, Lumsden's, a bit of Lumsden history, a bit on Mini Dean, which will add a bit of spice to it all, information on A199 here that we've got, and A525. So once the panelling's in, the steps are in, the building's finished, we might have a small opening for the public, and then this will be open and available for the public on a daily basis and closed in the afternoon. We've got someone in town that's quite happy to do that for us. Mm-hmm. So we're not a mile away, and we've come a long way, and considering that this was moved here from a yard in Lumsden where it was getting preserved to the railway station here. That was July 21, so made a lot of progress in just over a year.
A lot of fine touches put on as well. You were speaking earlier about these buffers here.
Yeah, there's this particular, the buffer here was under the trees for, I would have said, the 52 years, because Clark McCarthy, when we left the site, he said, I'll just have a look under the trees, and we're lucky he did, because he found the buffer here, he found all those handrails, and he found some of the gates. So we were lucky he had a bit of a squirrel around under there. I think he knows to do that out of experience, and that's enabled us to get those pieces. They were all rusted and in pretty bad shape, but we brought them back to as close as possible to the original, with the right paints and preparation. So that's made a hell of a difference. The paint on this carriage, we used Alltech, which is an outfit, and they use Carbrel paints. And we had a guy, Brett Davidson, out as like a consultant, and he made it very clear, if we're going to do something heritage, we want to make sure that we prepare it right, and we use the right undercoats and the right paints. And it's all oil-based paint. The exterior of the carriage itself has two undercoats on it. It has a multi-bond and then an isotol undercoat, and then it has three top coats on it. So, and all oil-based and all hand-painted by brush. Someone said, why don't we use a spray painter? They didn't have any in 1883, so we thought to look as the part, we would do it that way. Same with all the metal work, that's been stripped right back down, and then it had a metal prepared undercoat on it, and then it had three top coats on that as well. So we haven't sort of taken half measures on trying to preserve the carriage and the metalwork. On the front here, this was the end. This is the first class end or platform area. We think the end of the carriage of its life at Ojai in 1952 came from a ramming, because this plate was all bent in and the front of this whole platform was stoved in, and there was quite significant damage underneath. So we've repaired it to the best we can. There's some new bits in there like this. I've had a new plate built for here, new platform, the tread plates on the sides. We've used we had two of the original ones, and we've had copies made of the others. these railings here, we only had one of those, so we got 3 made over in Dunedin. Robin Keach, who's on our trust, is also a very accomplished engineer and ex-railways, so he made those up along with some other bits and pieces for us to go back onto the carriage. We've done the best we can with trying to keep, or the brief was to try and keep this carriage as it may have been when it came out of the Addington Yards in 1883. We've taken back the handrails. We're about 10 or 15 coats of paint on there. Gordon Lawrence, who's on our team, he's taken those back to the best he can. They still need a bit of polishing. We're going to do a final touch on them, including the top of the handrails up there, and get the brass back to the best as we can and put a coat on it to preserve it. Yeah, so we've been quite busy on the exterior. The back part here is pretty much original. Yeah, as I say, bar the platform and some other bits.
A lot of attention to detail, given that you wouldn't have had any colour photographs, obviously, to work off.
No, the interesting thing was, Chris, we didn't know what colour to paint it. There was Indian red, there was coronation red, there was a whole lot of different ideas out there, and we went to a lot of different people in the railway fraternity and asked what they thought. And what actually was the kicker for us was we were taking some beading off the end of one of the platforms to replace it. It was damaged, and underneath was drip paint that looked like it hadn't been exposed, obviously, to the elements or had any opportunity to be tainted. Or so we took that colour and we went to the Pantone, International Pantone chart, and we got colours made of that colour and 2 colours either side, and we got all those made up in samples, painted them on the side, and then we had a bit of a quiz amongst ourselves and a few other people around it, which colour they thought was the right one, and Rob and I picked this colour, and it was interesting to see, but the majority of people went for that colour, and they apparently these carriages were like a plum red, which was called an Indian red, but we thought that would have been too dark for in here, and we're quite happy with the red that we've gone with at this stage. And the comments that I've had since, most people would agree with that statement.
Yeah, it's very striking looking, isn't it?
Oh, it's
beautiful.
fantastic. Lovely colour to paint. You never get sick of it.
Yeah. Let's have a look inside, eh?
Sure.
Oh, it's looking amazing in here, isn't it?
Oh, it's magnificent. We're really happy how it's come up. I don't know if you remember what it was like when we got it, Chris, but if you had a look on our Facebook site, it would remind you. And when we put the information in here, the plans to have some photos of before and after. But this carriage was under the trees for 52 years. Been reasonably just left there, and it had a bit of rot in it, but it also had some tree branches through. We had a big branch through the side of the carriage here that had smashed all this, and Gordon had meticulously rebuilt in here. We couldn't get the bow out of it as best as we wanted to. We jacked it up and we left it jacked, and then we jacked it a bit more and a bit more, but we felt we got to the maximum flex point without smashing other things. So there is a bit of a bow still in there. The original first class carriage, when we got this carriage, it had a material like plaster, which was obviously for looks in here on this timber, but we opted to sand it all back and preserve the timber because obviously it's native timber, and we're glad we did that and didn't put something over that or paint it or anything like that. There's a fair bit of original stuff in here still. This is all original, this is original, these along here is original. The window panels are still original. The window sills are original. We took all the window sashes out, and because it's a static display and in a public area, we didn't want the windows moving. So these window frames are actually made out of Southern Beech, and Gordon Lawrence, he built all those himself. The windows were fitted by Riversdale Joinery, Barry O'Connor down there, and we also had to replace some of these beadings. It was quite interesting. We found on that beading there, we found on the back of that some penciled names of some people that were travelling on the carriage in 1951, and they had put their names on there, and through Facebook we actually tracked down the family, and one of the family members was an uncle and a 15-year-old nephew who were going up into the who were mining up in Ojai. Now, whether they were travelling from Invercargill to Ojai, or whether at this stage I would have thought it was just on, this carriage was used to take the miners up into the Ojai mine. So that's still there, and the family wanted a copy of that, so at some stage we're going to try and get a replication of that panel, but we feel that panel best stay here because it's part of the history of the carriage. It was quite interesting. So we also, on the panelling on the side, instead, because it's a display area, instead of having the rolling back to the seats or putting the seats in, we opted for some nice T&G, which is Macrocarpa T&G down there. Gordon got that organised, and Riversdale Joinery did the T&G work. That was also extra funded by Rail Heritage Trust New Zealand, so we're very grateful to them for the extra funding they've allowed for some specific stuff we wanted to do that we knew would blow the budget out. That included the T&G ceiling that was, the original one was still there in pretty bad repair, and we tried to preserve it, but we opted to take it out in the end. It was just too far gone. So once again, Riversdale Joinery with the T&G, and Gordon, he put all that up into there, and Rail Heritage Trust New Zealand also, when they funded the side panels, funded that as well. So without them we couldn't have gone to that extent to get it original. We also had a friend of Gordon's make up the old lantern holders there. That was based off one that was left there that was in pretty bad condition as well, so we just had those rebuilt, and he's done a fantastic job of those. And then on the floor, this is the original first class floor, and as you can see, I've got where the spittoons were of the day, which were a pretty controversial type of brass bowl in there that people used to spit in and what have you, and there's various complaints around the spittoons, and from ladies riding into the New Zealand railways and saying that they didn't like the smell and the draft and the dust coming up underneath their skirts when they were sitting in the train. But also the classic one was the New Zealand Railways had written a letter to the Otago Rugby Union complaining about the state of one of their carriages after obviously a momentous win on some province out of Otago, and they were complaining about the pig's feet, oysters and beer that were in the spittoon. So I think they eventually got covered over and no one used them. The first class carriage had a single seat north-south and a double seat north-south originally. We're not putting any seating in here. This is the original floor, bar Gordon cut a piece out of what was left of the second class floor and put it in here so we had some original timber. We took all that back, right back to wood, and then we stained it, and it's had 3 coats of stain and 3 coats of polyurethane over the top of it, and it's come up pretty good. We've also had Clark McCarthy from Project Steam Middlemarch. He organised to get the original workers' workshop plates made up over in Giltech, and Giltech have been fantastic with the plate work and casting different things for us over the carriage. You'll see the plates on the outside later on. So we're really rapt about having the workshop plates in there, and they're looking pretty sharp. So then we come down into the centre of the carriage, and what we've tried to do with the windows too is I found it really interesting that every window was stamp numbered. This was the first of the New Zealand built carriages, and what I found working on here, that there was a lot of obviously kit setting going on in different workshops and what have you, and all the window frames are numbered. All the pieces that came off were all numbered for each window frame, and I've tried to leave here I quite like the brass fittings for the window latches, We're going to put the window latches back on, but they won't be working, obviously. We're getting those done at the moment. So the other thing that was here was originally there was a big hole in the wall, which was the door for the farming family that had it. Gordon's meticulously restored this whole area here where the door was to look as original as possible, and I think he's done a pretty good job of that. So, well, a very good job in fact. He also rebuilt this whole centrepiece is all new. So he's done the work on that, and that's looking really sharp. And that leads us into the second class compartment, which in here we have put a new roof in. We not only did the ceiling in first class, we re-roofed the whole carriage. We've also, the celestial windows that were in this carriage, I tried to preserve what we could of the original ones, and we were going to get new ones built and put in place. The job became quite a big job and expensive, so we opted for getting some pre-made windows done down in Riversdale Joinery under the advice of Barry O'Connor, and they made those up, put the glass in them, brought them up here and buzzed them, the window frames, to fit the frames that were in place as the top celestial window area is quite distorted in areas. And that was a pretty clever thing to do, because if you weren't showing, you probably wouldn't know that they aren't the original windows. He's done a fantastic job with that, and I didn't know how it would turn out, but I'm really happy with it. The inside we've painted white as it would have been, down to this level here. When we got this carriage, this was all painted. These were all painted, everything was painted. And so we took it all back to timber. Same with first class, all painted. So we scraped it down, sanded it down, and brought up the varnish to show off the wood, which we're very, very glad we've done. A lot of work, but worth doing.
Is this arch as it would have been originally?
Yes. And there would have been a door. We modelled that off a carriage over in Ocean Beach Railway in Dunedin, and they've got a sister carriage of one of these, another Addington car, and I went and had a look at that one day and took some photos and got as close as we could. Some of the palleting's probably not quite 100, but I think for what it was, I think it's come up really, really well. I love the archway that he's built, and it's sort of got a bit of an aged look to it too. I really like what he's done there.
I'm interested that on one carriage you've got two delineated sections, first class, second class. There's not much keeping the rabble away from the hoi polloi, is there?
There would have been a door.
There would have been a door,
yeah,
but yeah.
And you would have paid a bit more for there.
Yeah.
My understanding is what you got there is the north-south seats. You got the extra insulation, which is that internal TNG ceiling. So that's a second tier, which gives you a bit more insulation, and it was a bit more ornate. And there was a few details in there, like on the end of the carriage, you can see what we've left, a little bit of a silver strip, and they were quite nicely done out and ornate. Whereas in here, in the second class carriage, you're facing it's east-west seating, so you're actually sitting longitudinally along the carriage, and you don't get the comfy seats and the insulation, and you're locked in here as a second class passenger.
No spittoons in second class?
There were.
There were?
There
Oh,
were.
I see.
We didn't replicate those in here. We thought we'd show that in there. Plans to get a brass spittoon made up at an engineer and put one in with a clear plate hone to demonstrate what they would have looked like on the time. I've got the design, I just need to get the guy to build it. A friend of mine, Russell Bradley, who's Linton Contracting, who helps us with all the locomotive recovery, worked on that project, worked on this project. He's actually kindly sourced one from the States from us, which is a enamel spittoon. So whether it fits in that hole or whatever, we're not sure, but we plan to put that on display at some stage. So also in here was the floor, and we opted to replace the floor. So we've gone to a macrocarpa TNG floor in here, and Gordon's done a very good job at laying that. And I think it's come up really well. We put three coats of stain. Once again, we went for a bit of a copy of the stain that was on the floor at the time and tried to replicate that. So that's a sort of a redwood colour, and as someone said to me, you don't want it too dark because it will darken the carriage up too much, but you don't want it too light that it doesn't look as it should have. So I think we've just about nailed the floor colour as well. And once again, we've got the maker's plate on the end there.
I have to say the light in here is actually quite beautiful.
Oh, it's a fantastic space. The amount of people that want to put cafes in here, or art studios, or some guy said, how much would I sell it for so you can have it as a beach house? And I said, well, that's never going to happen. So, and then we come to this door here, which I'm pretty sure that's the original lock and the NZR door knob, which we're pretty excited to have that on the carriage. The other thing that we've done is we've had Riversdale Joinery, when they redid the glass here, I haven't had time to clean it, but they've done such a good job because we've actually got that all done in timber. So instead of just putting something cheap in there to hold the glass in and take a shortcut, we went with all the timber beading. And they've done the same with the outside windows, all timber. We didn't use any, there was talk around using something cheaper or easier, and we said no, we want to have timber beading, so that's what we've done. And then coming out to the outside here, we're pretty much the same as the other end. This end was in better condition, and we've had the gates that were found in Wario. We've sanded all those down and had them all painted black as they should have been in the day, and they're functional, and we're pretty happy how they've turned out considering they were sort of pretty rusted and looking terrible. There's one gate here that we had to replace, and someone kindly, Clark McCarthy, kindly found me that gate, and it's not quite the same as the others, but Northern South and Engineering down in Riversdale, they added a piece on the top and you'd hardly notice the difference. They've been fantastic. They came and fitted the gates the other day, and have helped us out with some other engineering requirements. The other thing that I quite like about this carriage is, of its era, was these crowns, and there was quite a few of those missing when we got the carriage, and Giltech Engineering, we sent those over to them. They had them replicated, and we've managed to put all those back on, and yeah, just an ornate little piece that wasn't on future carriages such as 525, which is the end of the 19th century carriage. So this was some of that ornate stuff that was everywhere, but not much of it survived, Chris. It was pretty stuffed.
So in terms of budget, John, this was part of the budget for the locomotive, the V recovery,
yes,
the original job. So this was all included in the same budget, is that correct?
Yes, that's right. So what happened, Chris, was that we had the locomotive recovery budget of 158,000, and we had local funders and we had lotteries. And what happened with the project was that the V recovery project was meant to have an information centre and signage, and we opted for, we were looking at a little freezer wagon down in Wario that is down there, that was gifted to our trust from another outfit that was down there once upon a time. And I was down there with Gordon looking at that, and we were going to have that as an information centre. It would be about the size of a van. And anyway, while we were down there, I rang a chap called Hamish Montgomery of the Montgomery family down in Wario, who was on the V project, who told Clark McCarthy that he knew where the carriage was down in Wario that Clark had been looking for, and I'd been down to have a look myself to see if it was there. And I rang Hamish and I said, look, I'm down in Wario. Someone mentioned you knew where the carriage was that we've all been looking for. And he said, oh yeah, I do. I said, it's on the family farm. And I said, oh, okay, where's that? And he said, oh, it's down the back of the domain there somewhere. He said, you go down there and I'll get my sister to meet you there. And anyway, we drove down there to have a look, and out pops Liz Montgomery, who I've hunted with the hunt club for years. And we got chatting away, and the mother turned up, and we were talking to her, and then I was linking all the dots with Hamish, who does the water blasting for the projects, plus some stuff on farm. And anyway, they had indicated that there was another organisation that had a look at the carriage a while back, and they'd sort of indicated that they wanted it, but they felt that they couldn't get out from where it was because it was under the big trees with the big branches. There was a broken down old shed in front of it, and that would need removing. And I think the cost of doing all that just seemed to be out of their budget. And their option was to cut it up and take it out. And the Montgomerys felt if it could go out of there in totality and be preserved somewhere or go to good use, then they'd be prepared to gift it or let whoever's organisation could do that. So I got hold of all the guys that were on the V project, and I said, look, you know, that was Smith Cranes, Linton Contracting, Southern Machine Hire, and I showed them the project, and I said, this is what we've got to do. Can we get this thing out of there and up to Lumsden for preservation? So they said, yep, we can do that. We talked to the owners. We said, look, if we remove the shed for you and we take the, you know, cut the trees back and get access to this thing, are we able to take it? And they said, yes, we'd gift it to you. So they wrote a letter of gift. So I went to lotteries and talked to the people at lotteries through internal affairs and said, look, we've had quite a lot of goodwill on the locomotive recovery project. We've got a bit of money left over. We're looking at an information centre. We're looking at one this big, but would it be okay if we did one this big? And so I had to write a whole business plan down of what we were proposing and what it meant and what it would be in the end and what it meant to heritage. And because it's an 1883 carriage, there are a few of them around, but we were going to put it on display in Lumsden. We were going to preserve it to the best as we could. They looked at the business plan, asked me a few more questions, and then said, yes, you can carry on with that project to that point. So we were very lucky that they allowed that, and as it's turned out, we've preserved a heritage item that is going to be open to the public. That is also going to be an information centre, not only for the Heritage Trust on the Lumsden, on the locomotive recovery project, but it's going to also tell a bit of the history about this, the other items that we have in the Heritage Trust portfolio, but also stories, you know, a little bit about Minnie Dean and a few of the other things. Ojai Railway Board, which is over in the western south in there. That all these carriages they served on the Ojai Railway line. So as it turns out, we're gonna have nothing left. So we would have spent our budget, but we would have completed the stages of the budget, including the information centre, on budget and on time.
So in terms of what goes in here next, you've got the information panels that'll tell those stories. How are they getting created?
Rob Scott, who's not only on the trust, he owns Canvart, which is a printing and canvas printing outfit in town. So he's actually come up with some panels that will fit in between these panels here, and we're not going to do all of them. We're not going to overcrowd this carriage with information, because we feel like as a carriage itself, it's got a lot of purpose. So we're going to have information panels on here, and for instance, you'd have the V recovery project would give an indication where those locomotives were built, how they got to New Zealand, how they served, how they landed up getting dumped, and how they got recovered, including looking forward to having the pictures of the sailing ships up there that they came in and kit set on in New Zealand into the different ports.
Okay, so we're having a look at the exterior now, and there's obviously a lot of detail here as well.
Yeah, Chris, we're very lucky that through some chaps over in Dunedin, Ocean Beach Railway had a couple of these bogies, which were actually freight wagon bogies from the 1800s as well, and they were sitting under a wagon and some long grass, and we put an expression of interest in for those, and they gave us a price to get them, and we paid that and managed to recover them from there. So they went down to Invercargill, they got sandblasted off, Southern Insulation sandblasted them off, and and painted them, put undercoat on and painted them gloss black, and then they came and sat on track here for quite a while. So we were very lucky to get those.
So quick education for the uninitiated, bogies are the wheel chassis, is that?
Yes.
Wheel sets?
Yeah, that's right. They've got the two wheels and the frame, and obviously they turn, centre point goes through the carriage, and that's the pivot point as they go around the corners and what have you, yeah. So, and you'll notice on here versus the ladder 525 down there, that they had the spoke wheels, and apparently the spoke wheels were not that reliable. They were light, but they weren't that reliable, and someone told me that in fact they had a guy at the station who'd go along with a hammer and hit them listening to the ping that came from them. If it was a dull thud, they knew they were cracked and had to come off and get fixed. So eventually they went to the solid state wheel, which they didn't have that problem. Yeah.
Let's have a look at this beautiful brasswork here.
Yeah, so what happened here was when we got the carriage, there was some remnants of where the plates would have fitted. And on this carriage, the plates that, the pattern that Clive Davis sent us from Wellington was longer than the imprint that we had on the carriage. So we opted to talk to Giltech Engineering or Precision Castings over in Dunedin, and we had a discussion about actually getting the Davis plates to fit this carriage to where the size was, the imprint was on this carriage. So what we did was Robin over there and Giltech worked it out that he refonted resized the font and the plate and made it to fit for this carriage. And as I say, it was off the imprint that was here, so we felt whatever that was there should have gone back. So they're made out of bronze. They've been polished by a guy called Ted Lynch over in Dunedin. He's done a great job. And then we had a guy in town here paint in between the bronze with the red to give the backdrop, and Mark McBride, and he's done a fantastic job there.
Oh, that's actually painted onto the bronze, is it?
Yeah, it's
yes,
on
it
the
is.
bronze.
It is too, yeah.
And then we had to find a way to secure them because we were warned about seagulls. And so what we've done is that they are pretty well hard fixed on there. If you wanted to get them off, A, you'd be filmed by the security cameras, and B, you'll have to be here a while to get them out because I made sure that they were there to stay. So it's not a challenge to anybody, but they are reasonably firmly secured there. We've got the first class one done. Obviously we've got the number plate coming. We haven't managed to get that done at this stage. We're going to use an oval plate, which would have been the plate of the day, with the obviously A199 on it. So we're just waiting on those to get cast. Yep, and you'll notice also on the windows on the outside here, once again, we instead of using a cheaper material, we used timber to inset the windows, and the windows have actually got rubber seals, so they stay nicely sealed up. And yeah, the other second class plate here. And on the outside, the plan is to, we've got some steps that have been folded up, tread plate steps, and with a handrail for public access. There'll be steps at each end, enter in one end, go through the 19th century, and the other side of the carriage, split carriage, will be the 20th century. So yeah, should make a good display. We'll also have at the bottom of the information a barcode. Currently we've only got a Facebook site, so we'll either link you to the Facebook site, and following this project we're looking at building a website. So if we've got a website, it will link to the website, which will give you an indication on carriages and locomotives, rolling stock, and everything else that we've done to date and what we're planning to do in the future. So the panels will be in here. We want to make it quite simple in here for the other reason that we want the public to feel free to walk through. If we had items all around the place, you worry about some of those potentially seagulls coming along and things disappearing. And also vandalism, which we haven't had any cases of vandalism, but we just, if we keep it simple, we don't have that problem. And I've had a lot of interest working on here, even though there's no tourists. The amount of people that come through here, especially during the weekend, I'd probably be dealing with 20, 25 different groups of people, or mum and dad and kids, or coming through here, looking at the locomotives, having a look at the trains, the wagons. I usually open the blue one when I'm working here so they can go and sit in there and enjoy that. And they're all absolutely enthused and supportive of having an information centre here. They're looking forward to their next return to be able to go through and get all the history. We've actually got the next project already underway. We've got to have this completed to make sure that we're clear for future funding. So I've got funding applications in. This should be done by, which was the time was to be finished, completion date was end of November. We'll have this done by the end of November. I've put in funding applications to district and local funding around a carriage to go behind here, which is an 1877 C-class carriage. That was the last of the imported carriages from the UK. So originally we used to import our carriages and they'd get assembled here and then they would go online. So this carriage is quite unique. There's only 4 left in the country. One's on track up in Glenbrook, which has been fully restored. One's in a shed in Nelson. Another one serves as an accommodation unit somewhere up in Canterbury or North Canterbury. And then there's one sitting behind a house in Winton. And we found that out by the guy that Clive Davis, who kindly gave us the patterns to use for the plates on the outside, which we'll see in a minute, the first and second class plates plus the number plates. I asked him where there might be a guards van or something of that like of heritage that might go on the back here to complete a heritage train, and I blame Clark McCarthy for that, because he told me if you have a heritage train that's pretty cool. And so I thought that's a good idea for Lumsden. So Clive mentioned about this carriage down in Winton, so I found out where it was. I went and saw the owner of the property. I had a chat to him. His name's Chris McDermott of McDermott Buses in Invercargill. The house has only ever had 3 owners there, and it would have been there when that was farmland. One of the owners of the house worked on the Western Railway, which we're picking as Ojai. I think his name was Donnelly. And behind that house is this carriage. And so I went and had a look at this carriage, and I had a chat to Mr. McDermott and his wife, and they said, well, if you can get it out of here, you can have it. So I've had the A-team back in there. Linton Contracting's had a look. We're not using Smith cranes this time because it's more of a sort of a house removal job than a lifting job. We can't lift over the house. We can't get heavy gear in there because it's the back of a residential property. And we've also had King's House Removals have had a look in there, and Clark and myself, and we've all gone down and had a look. So the plan is to get that out of there in February and bring it up to Lumsden for preservation. And the other part of that plan is we've had to find a undercarriage for it, because it's only a box, there's no underframe. So we've been working on an idea of using an old type of sheep wagon frame, which would give us the single wheels and would give us a frame, and all the headstock and what have you is all there. And the thing with the C, it wasn't on bogies, it was actually 3 single axles, and the single axles used to actually pivot, which we wouldn't be having here because it's static display, but they were 3-axle carriage. Apparently they rode pretty rough. So the one down in Winton is a second class carriage. It's just one compartment. There's no celestial windows. And as I say, the funding application's in for that, and if we're successful with local funding, then we'll get her out in February, and we'll go to lotteries in January for some more funding for that project to complete it and get it to the state. And that'll go on the back here. We'll put a little bit more railway track on. We'll extend the building, and that'll sit here as a train. So we'll have, the cool thing about this, which this has just happened coincidentally maybe, is we'd have the last of the imported carriages into New Zealand 1877, first of the New Zealand built carriages 1883, and the last of the 1800s, the 1896 A525 sitting there. So that would give us a advancement in passenger carriage engineering from the mid 1800s to the last of the 1800s, which would make quite a nice heritage train in Lumsden, which would mean, other than the Kingston Florin here, which was generally 1900s advanced, the ABs and the carriages are normally, most of those are 1900 plus. That would mean that there probably hasn't been a train here, heritage train here, for potentially, and I can't quite quantify this, around 70 years, which would make a really cool display. And the community are behind it. Sounds like the funding people are reasonably responsive. Anybody I've talked to around rail heritage is really excited by getting that carriage